Man, I think this race in this place is kind of growing on me. We had some incredibly thrilling racing throughout all 6 hours, a fuel mileage thriller in the final hour, and we also got some longer running in the middle of this race where we got to see some strategy develop. So let's talk about it. This is your TireRack.com Battle on the Bricks post-race report. Man, what a weekend here at Indianapolis, from the chaotic Michelin Pilot Challenge race that we saw yesterday to carrying that over to today, and the weather uncertainty that actually didn't end up coming to be. It was some beautiful weather today in Indianapolis, and really I thought it produced an overall great race. We haven't really gotten, well, last year's 6-hour race, the only other edition of the 6-hour race, we had weather that interrupted it and certainly gave us plenty of entertainment, but we finally got to see what a true dry 6-hour race looks like here, and honestly, I was very impressed. Now, there was a lot of chaos in this race, sure, and especially in the early portion of the race. We had spins, cars getting stuck, full course cautions for pieces of debris on the field, but once we got over some of that initial hump, I thought we settled into a nice rhythm, especially in the middle part of the race. Like I said, we started to see some of that strategy develop on the longer green flag runs. In fact, we saw a green flag stint of just over 2 hours, which, if you'll remember from the preview video, I don't think we had seen a green flag run here at Indy since Imsa's returned 2 years ago that was longer than just over an hour. And then, of course, in the final half of this race, as we were also developing some fuel strategy, we really saw some great racing take place out on track too. Some good, hard racing that at times may have crossed the line, and when it did cross the line, hand it to Imsa. They handed out penalties, and they weren't scared to hand out penalties either. We came off of that race at Road America back in August where I think everybody wanted to see things cleaned up, and Imsa, I think, did what they could do to help clean that up. A ton of penalties were handed out. I was going to try and note how many were handed out in this race, but I would have been in the media center all night adding those up. So there were a ton of penalties handed out in this race, but I mean, we heard drivers in the post-race press conference as well that was praising Imsa. Felipe Albuquerque praised Imsa for handing out those penalties and saying, that we need to clean it up. We don't want to have drivers pushing each other off into the grass, because that's what they could do and they could get away with it before. It seems like IMSA's past the point and race control's past the point of letting that happen. And ultimately, I thought it led to some really fun and great racing at the end of this one. So let's jump into it and talk about the race here and start off with GTP. And honestly, this race in GTP, I thought may have been our best GTP race of the season. We saw that great fuel strategy thriller and play out in the final hour of the race. We saw some great clean battles take place throughout this race as well. We had multiple manufacturers in the hunt, which, to be honest, isn't usually an issue with GTP. Usually we have a couple of manufacturers that are right there fighting for the win. And then we also saw some great recovery drives, recovering from incidents that happened early in the race. Or in the case of the number 10 Wayne Taylor Racing Acura, they recovered from a puncture. There was some great racing all around, but in the end, it was the number 31 Whelen Racing Cadillac V-Series R of Jack Aiken, Earl Bamber, and Fred Vesti taking the win. They were dominant in this race. They led 210 of 243 laps to pick up Cadillac's first win on the season. If you had asked anybody at the beginning of the season if you had thought that it would be the second to last round of the year before we saw Cadillac put up their first win, I don't know if anybody would have believed you. So it was a well-deserved win for Cadillac. They showed pace yesterday in qualifying. They showed pace in practices, but I think we thought Acura may have had the edge on them a little bit. That didn't play out here in the race. They put on a great show today, and they end up walking away with the win. Finishing second was the number 10 Wayne Taylor Racing Cadillac, and rounding out the podium, the 60 Meyer Shank Racing Acura. So the 31 gets the win, but it wasn't just the win for Cadillac. They also got second with the 10 Wayne Taylor Racing entry. Another great run for them. Like I said, I think I said this in the pre-race show, Cadillac is starting to build up some momentum here, and this was a really big race for them to try and build some momentum into next year as well. But it certainly wasn't without, maybe controversy isn't the right word, but without its hurdles for the 10, especially here, as they had a puncture just after the halfway mark of the race. They fell a lap down. They were able to claw their way back into it, but they were slightly off strategy of everybody else, and that almost cost them at the very end of this race. They had a little bit less fuel than most of the other cars in the GTP class. And had the race ultimately gone green to the end, they would not have been able to make it to the end on fuel. So a late full course yellow saved them. But regardless, the 10 Cadillac had great pace this weekend as well. And then there's the third Cadillac. We're forgetting Cadillac started first, second, and third in this race after the 60 got the qualifying penalty. So all three of the Cadillacs were strong here. The 40, they ended up coming in and topping up. They didn't have great track position. They got pushed around a little bit as the race went on. They got run into by the 65 Ford Mustang. They ended up finishing a number of laps down. The 65 just missed turn one, it seemed like, and hit the 40 pretty hard. So the 40 lost a bunch of track position, but they played a bit of a strategy game here in the final stint. They topped up on the final full course yellow so that they had a little bit of extra fuel. I think if this race had run green, then we may have saw them win the race. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for them with the late full course yellow coming out, and they would go on to finish in 9th. Acura had their share of issues throughout the weekend as a whole as well. We talked about the 60 in my video yesterday about qualifying, but the number 93, who is the one that is higher up in the championship standings, they also had an issue of their own with just under half an hour, right around half an hour to go in this race. They got into the wall coming out of the final corner down the back straightaway, pardon me. Just one of those kind of racing deals. They were multi-class racing at its finest right there. Made a little bit of contact with the wall. Thankfully, they were fine. They didn't pick up any damage. But in addition to the 60 finishing in 3rd, the 93 would go on to finish in 5th. A solid day for them, but I can't help but think for Acura, this has to be kind of what could have been day for them. You see, we'll talk about Porsche in a minute. They had a bad day today. And this was a prime opportunity for Acura to try and, vault their way into the thick of it in the championship standings with the number 93, and they couldn't really take full advantage of that today, which they might end up looking back on and be disappointed ultimately with a 5th place result today. But yeah, 3rd and 5th for Acura today. BMW, I just thinking back on this race, I'm like, what's really memorable for me about BMW's day? I just kind of think that they went out there and they kind of ran their own race. They stayed out of trouble, and ultimately they come home with a 4th and a 6th place finish. So again, maybe like Acura, although BMW didn't have the same pace, I don't think, as Acura did ultimately, but maybe a bit of a what could have been race for them. Again, they are trying to track down Porsche as well in the GTP championship fight. So again, what could have been for BMW, but a 4th place finish does close up the championship fight in GTP. We'll talk about that here in a few minutes. Again, like Acura, BMW's probably looking at this, what could have been. Now there's Porsche, and the factory Porsches had a rough race. They didn't have incredible pace all weekend long, but you just have to know that Porsche Penske is going to come through. They're going to be competitive in the race, and they were competitive at times here. It's not like, I don't think that they were as off the pace as, people were thinking they were going to be heading into the weekend when we saw the BOP tables. They had competitive pace, and they showed it throughout the race. It was just over-aggressiveness and picking up penalties that, you just can't really pick up, especially when we knew today the race control was going to be very, very firm on penalties being handed out. You just couldn't have a race that they put together today. They picked up some blocking penalties really early on in the race, and they were able to recover from those quite quickly. But what really did them in, and what really did the number 7 in particular, was just late race over-aggressiveness. The 7, they got together with the 25 at one point in the race, but as we got down to towards the end of the race, the number 7 sent it hard into the 023 Ferrari, who at the time was leading the GTD class, and they spun them out. They picked up a drive-through penalty ultimately for incident responsibility. Absolutely a deserved penalty in my eyes. And after making a pit stop as well as serving that penalty, they ultimately ended up falling about a lap and a half down to the GTP leader, a gap that they could never close back up. Now, as I alluded to, Porsche was far from the only ones that were getting penalties in this race. We were getting race control handing out penalties sort of left, right, and center, whether it be for blocking, incident responsibility, you name it, we were seeing it. I mentioned off the top, I wanted to try and count how many we saw, and maybe I still will, but it was a ton of penalties that we saw handed out in this race. And I think heading into Petit Le Mans, a race that we've historically seen some aggression in as well, you got to wonder if this race here today is finally going to be what flips the switch for some of these drivers to really tone things down a little bit. And we saw some good hard racing. We saw what these drivers are capable of, and I'm maybe going away from the GTP class now into some of the GTD Pro class, for instance. I think it's important that we continue down this path of cleaning up the racing and make sure we don't have a repeat of Road America. So to bring it back to Porsche, a disappointing day for them. The 6 ended up finishing 7th, and then the 7 car, they had a really rough day. They finished last in the GTP class in 12th. Lamborghini, I think everybody expected a little bit more from. Maybe I thought they had a solid race, ran a solid race, had solid pace. They were running in the top 5 for a good chunk of this race, and definitely looking like they were going to be on for their best Imsa finish. But things just didn't really work out for them in the final hour with that late full course yellow, and they ended up coming into top up, I think, early in that final stint. So the really late full course yellow with just like 8 minutes to go really hurt them. And ultimately, for Lamborghini, there's a lot of positives to take away from this weekend, especially heading into Road Atlanta. But I think they came out and they showed some solid pace. A 10th place finish wasn't going to be what they were looking for, but it's what they walk away with. We'll see if Lamborghini can finish the season off strong and potentially the SC63's life. Finish that off strong when they head to Road Atlanta. Finally, the Aston Martin finished 11th. They didn't really have much pace at all this weekend. Nothing else really to say about Aston Martin. See if they can improve here heading into Road Atlanta as well, much like the Lamborghini. Now, if you're like me, you've probably found yourself at the racetrack with your camera looking at why your photos don't look quite as good as the pros. If this is you, then check out Paddock Focus Photography Workshops. Paddock Focus co-host Jamie Price, you see his work here all the time on the Off in the S's YouTube channel. Well, you can learn from him as well as fellow co-host Drew Gibson in the comfort of your own home. Everything from how to become a motorsports photographer, race-specific guides for races like the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And for Off in the S's viewers, you can get 10% off of any Paddock Focus Photography Workshop by using the code S's at checkout. That's promo code S's at paddockfocus.teachable.com, or click the first link in the description. Man, what a typical LMP2 day we had here today. We had spins, an early race contact, debris, some full course yellows that were being caused by them. But then later, that chaos of the beginning of the race turned into some good, and at times, I guess, maybe chaotic battles. But nonetheless, I think that's kind of what we expect from LMP2 at this point. It was also a race that we saw United Autosports dominate in, for the most part, until it really mattered the most. The final 40 minutes of this race were shaping up to be incredibly close. We had some great battles developing on track, but then the number 22 got spun out by their teammate, who was going 3 wide along with the number 43 Inter-Europol car. That 22 got spun out. They were able to continue, but obviously didn't get the result that they frankly deserved in this one. And it's just a silly incident, a silly dive up the inside, and ultimately breaking the first rule of any team: don't spin out your teammate. The 04 CrowdStrike entry also had a solid run here today. They were running in 3rd, but with 8 minutes to go, they backed it into the wall and brought out the final full course yellow of the race. Thankfully, we were able to go back green for a 2-lap shootout at the end of it. But an unfortunate end to the day for the 04, who they were in line for a podium, and they had a solid race today. Ultimately, though, it was the number 11 TDS Racing entry of Stephen Thomas, Mikel Grenier, and Hunter McElrea who took home the win ahead of the number 43 Inter-Europol, and the 74 Riley brought it home in 3rd. What is there even to say anymore about GTD Pro? We just expect these guys to be battling it out all race long, from green flag to checkered flag, and that's what they did here again today. Ford, Porsche, BMW, the Corvettes, they all showed great pace at times in this race, and they were all together for a pretty wild final hour. There was a battle for the lead with Rexy, Ford, the Corvettes, BMW. Like I said, they were all in there. It was really fun to watch. We also saw some argy-bargy take place between many of these competitors. But really a fun battle ultimately to watch. At the end, though, it was the number 64 Ford Multimatic Mustang of Mike Rockenfeller and Seb Prio who would take home the win, ahead of the number 81 Dragon Speed Ferrari and the number 48 Paul Miller Racing BMW. Now, Ferrari, despite showing a ton of pace in practice, they couldn't really carry that through into qualifying, and they were just lurking, it seemed like, for much of this race. But they peaked when it counted the most, and they walk away with a second place finish here today. That's going to close up the championship points fight with the number 3 Corvette. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now, like GTD Pro, we also saw many different manufacturers, many different teams in the hunt in GTD. You had Ferrari and Mercedes that were strong all race, but you also saw the likes of Aston Martin show good pace throughout the weekend. And honestly, I'm surprised that we aren't talking about Aston Martin with a better finish here today. The Van der Stur Racing Aston Martin did unfortunately bow out early in the race after sustaining some damage. The number 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin, they did lead some laps, but they got spun around sort of in the midpoint of this race, and they could just never recover from it. I thought that they were going to be one of the favorites here today. You also got to look at the number 45 Wayne Taylor Racing Lamborghini. How many times have we talked about them having good pace this season and just not having luck on their side and getting caught up in something? The broadcast said it sounded like they had a broken differential with an hour and 10 to go. They were running third at the time after starting last place in class, so they had done a great job throughout the middle portion of this race, pulling themselves into contention, but once again, they just don't have a good result to show for it. Windward Racing, the championship points leader, they were right in the thick of the fight too all day long, but a late race speeding penalty, I think it was on the final full course yellow, or the second to last full course yellow, the one with an hour to go in the race. They picked up a speeding penalty there. That killed their race. They dropped back, but as we just talked about, the number 27 wasn't able to take full advantage of it, so 57 is still in the driver's seat of the championship. Oh yeah, and then we have the 023 Ferrari. They looked really strong as well. They worked their way into the lead, but then they got absolutely driven into by the number 7 Porsche in the later goings of the race. They were able to continue, but they just weren't the same, and they didn't end up getting a finish that they really deserved. At the end, though, it was a different Ferrari, the number 70 Inception Racing Ferrari of Frederick Schandorf, Ollie Milroy, and Brandon Arieb, who took the win here in GTD ahead of the number 120 Wright Motorsports Porsche and the 34 Conquest Racing Ferrari. The win for the 70 also brings them even with the 13 AWA Corvette for the Bob Aitken Bronze Cup. What that means is heading into Road Atlanta, whoever finishes ahead between those two cars, if it's the 13 or the 70, they have an auto invite to Le Mans the following year. So that is going to be a big storyline to follow as we head into Petit Le Mans. We also had some support series action take place this weekend. The Michelin Pilot Challenge race was pretty darn wild. A ton of penalties handed out in that one as well. We'll probably talk about that more on Four Doors and GT4s, which is a podcast with TCR race engineer Aaron Pfeiffer that I do. We'll probably have that out in a couple of weeks. Stay tuned for a notification on that. But in the Michelin Pilot Challenge race in GS, it was Moise Aretsky and Michael Cooper who pulled off a last lap pass in their Ibiza Farms Mercedes to take the GS win. In TCR, it was Tyler Gonzalez and Eric Powell who won for Victor Gonzalez Racing Team. That is Cupra's first win in Imsa. The Lamborghini Super Trofeo Series was also present this weekend. In the Pro class, it was a sweep for Hampus Eriksson and Danny Formal. In the Pro-Am class, Jackson Lee and Trent Hinman swept both of the races there. And in the Am class, it was Matteo Cederman who swept both of those races, while it was also a sweep in the LB Cup for Nick Grote. In Porsche Carrera Cup North America, the Pro class was won race 1 by Zachary Vanier and race 2 by Aaron Johnson. The Pro-Am class saw Patrick McCulley win race 1 and James Safronis win race 2. And in the Masters class, it was Scott Blind who swept the weekend's races. Let's take a look at the point standings now, presented by P1 Web Development. If you're a race driver, team, chassis builder, or engine shop who takes racing seriously, but your online presence is an afterthought, you're leaving money on the table. P1 builds sites that get you noticed, get you sponsors, and get your business taken seriously. You can visit the new P1 website at p1webdevelopment.com. In GTP, it's number 6, Porsche Penske Motorsports 963, that still leads the sister number 7 by 131 points. The next closest competitor is the number 24 M-Team RLL BMW, who are 145 points back. They're within striking distance heading into Petit Le Mans, but it's going to take quite a bit to catch them. The number 93 Meyershank Racing Acura is in 4th and rounding out the top 5, the number 10 Cadillac Wayne Taylor Racing entry. In LMP2, it's an 85-point advantage for the number 99 AO Racing entry over the 22 United Autosports car. Man, you got to think if the 22 could have just kept it together for that final stint, this could be a much tighter championship fight. The 74 Riley Motorsports is in 3rd, the number 11 TDS Racing entry in 4th, and in 5th, the number 43 Inter Europol car. In GTD Pro, it's the number 3 Corvette Racing by Pratt Miller Motorsports Corvette leading the way with 2,942 points. That's just an 18-point advantage over the number 81 Dragon Speed Ferrari. What a fun battle we're going to have there heading into the final race of the season. The 64 Ford Multimatic Mustang is in 3rd with the 77 AO Racing Porsche in 4th. And rounding out the top 5, the number 48 Paul Miller Racing BMW. Finally, in GTD, it's the number 57 Windward Racing Mercedes, which increased their lead over the 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin to 224 points. That championship battle is just about wrapped up here. The number 12 Astor Sullivan Lexus is in 3rd, the number 96 Turner Motorsports BMW in 4th, and the 120 Wright Motorsports Porsche rounds out the top 5. It was a great weekend here in Indianapolis. My first time here. I want to thank all of you for following along with the videos, the podcast, whatever it might have been all weekend long. I appreciate the support. To everybody who stopped and said hi, thank you as well. I really look forward to being at some more races next year. Probably going to try and do some live streaming of the season finale at Petit Le Mans, so keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, you can go and check out this video. Whatever the YouTube algorithm is going to recommend you is what I'm going to send you to. Also, a huge shout out to all of the channel supporters. If you too want to support the show, you can head to patreon.com/AwesomeyEsses, or you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the button below. Once again, thanks for tuning in. I hope everyone has a great race weekend and doesn't go off in the S's.